I'm Professor James Adams. Glad to have you all here. I'm going to turn on chat at the end of the presentation in about 30 to 40 minutes, so that way you can post any questions and we'll have a chance to review them. I'll also be sending you a copy of this presentation, so thank you for registering, and you'll get a copy of the presentation after we're done. So just a little bit of background. This is a talk on bacterial and yeast toxins being extremely elevated in most children with autism. We're going to talk a little bit about the discovery we've made, about the new tests that we've developed, and the treatments that we're continuing to work on and improve. I'm a professor at Arizona State University. I'm also the president of Autism Diagnostics, which is offering, along with Antiludos, this new test we've developed. I'm also the president of Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, which is a company we formed to raise money to support our research at ASU so we can get microbiota transplant approved by the FDA. Most importantly, I'm the proud father of a daughter with autism, diagnosed over 30 years ago, and that's what's driven me to shift all my research to focus on looking at the causes of autism, how to diagnose it, how to treat it, how to prevent it. So we'll be talking about a lot of that today. And so let's go ahead and get started. So just in general, we know that roughly 40% of children and adults with autism have obvious gut symptoms. These include constipation, diarrhea, often alternating between the two, bloating, and pain. Realize that your gut is about 28 feet long, so you could be having a bowel movement every day, but still be very backed up. We did a study, which we published 15 years ago now, showing that children with autism who have worse gut symptoms also have much worse autism symptoms. So the focus of what we're looking at is don't just treat the symptoms, but try to treat the root cause, which appears to be, in most cases, bad gut bacteria and yeast affecting those symptoms. We found that these gut symptoms strongly correlate with the severity of autism. So in the blue is the children with autism who don't have gut problems, and in red, the children with autism who do have gut problems. And we see using the ATEC, which is a very widely used, probably the most widely used tool for assessing autism symptom severity. We see the kids who have GI problems have much worse speech problems, much worse social problems, much worse social, sensory, and cognitive problems, and much worse physical and behavioral problems. So our hope is if we can treat those GI symptoms, we can hopefully push that red bar down to the blue bar and perhaps beyond. But again, I'm very hopeful. This work has been cited by over 1,000 other researchers, so it's received a lot of attention. And since then, have been a number of other studies which also show that autism symptoms, or a subset of symptoms, correlate with worse gut problems. So a little bit of background. What is the role of the human gut microbiota? The healthy microbiome is very important. You have about 500 species of bacteria in your gut. They help you with digesting food and producing vitamins. They help produce butyrate from fiber, and that's the primary nutrient for the cells that line your gut. Most people don't consume nearly enough fiber, so their gut cells are literally starving for this key nutrient, butyrate. Our gut bacteria also help with water balance for normal bowel movements, not too soft, not too hard. They help regulate the immune system. Much of your immune system is located in the gut because that's where our bodies are exposed to bacteria and viruses that are on the food that we eat or the water we consume. Also, our gut bacteria are good guys, help compete against a wide variety of pathogens. On the other hand, unfortunately, we've discovered most children with autism have a variety of pathogenic microbiomes that can damage the intestine. They can cause a wide variety of GI symptoms. Very importantly, they produce toxins that can affect the brain and the body, and they can disrupt the immune system and impede the immune system, and they compete against the good bacteria. So the microbiome can greatly affect your gut health, but also affect the health of your body and brain. So your gut bacteria make a lot of beneficial metabolites, certain bile acids, butyrate, as I mentioned, the critical food for your gut. They help produce certain key vitamins. But unfortunately, many kids with autism have an unhealthy gut that produces a wide range of toxins. And those toxins can leak out of the gut. In fact, the bacteria can damage the gut to increase the amount of toxins that leak out. And they leak out of the gut into the body and can reach the brain. And so, our recent work over the last 6 months has revealed that roughly 90% of children have extremely high levels of toxic metabolites from gut bacteria and or yeast infections. So one important example is P-cresol sulfate. This is elevated in 17 of 17 studies of children with autism. It's rare in science to see so much agreement, but across many countries, all the studies agree children with autism on average have much higher levels. But not every child. There's a subset of about 25 to 35% of kids with autism who have high levels. We know that it's correlated with worse autism symptoms. The higher the level, the worse the symptoms, according to 3 studies. We know it's toxic to the gut, the body, and the brain. But we've also discovered many other toxic metabolites that are also significantly elevated in autism. And the bottom line is that almost every child with autism has one or more extremely elevated metabolites. So I'm very excited that just yesterday, a review paper on one of these metabolites, the most well-known, P-cresol, was just published. And so my PhD student, Christina Flynn, led this. We worked on it very hard for 2 years, and it was just published yesterday. And so this article, we'll send out a link to this also in the next few days to our email list. And so I won't go through the details of the abstract, but I'll included them in the PowerPoint so you can look at it. But I want to get, because we know so much about P-cresol, I wanted to go through a little bit because this is a great example of one of many toxic metabolites in the gut. So in the gut, P-cresol acts as an antibiotic. It kills other bacteria so it can help outcompete them. So we believe that bacteria that make it then can last for many years or even decades because of the fact that killing off the competition. Also, P-cresol weakens the intestinal barrier, creating what we call leaky gut. So great amounts of toxins from the gut, including microbial metabolites, can leak out of the gut into the body. We know that in the brain, it competes with neurotransmitter synthesis, because P-cresol is made from phenylalanine or tyrosine, which is an important precursor to make dopamine and other important neurotransmitters. We know that it impedes dendritic growth. We know that it modulates early brain growth. When we know that it affects the dopamine receptor, and it can irreversibly inhibit the conversion of dopamine to norepinephrine. So you get too much dopamine, too little noradrenaline or norepinephrine. In the mitochondria, very important that we know that it disrupts mitochondrial functioning, resulting in less energy being produced and resulting in more oxidative stress, more production of reactive oxygen species. And we've known for over 20 years that kids with autism have increases of oxidative stress. It hasn't been very clear why. And these toxins seem to be one of the major reasons why we have increased oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction in many children with autism. That increased oxidative stress decreases glutathione, which is the primary antioxidant, but it also helps get rid of many other toxins, toxic materials like lead and mercury. And so indirectly, P-cresol affects that. It's also in the liver. The liver converts P-cresol to P-cresol sulfate because P-cresol isn't very soluble, but when the body sulfates it, then it can be excreted easily in the urine. But unfortunately, this appears to be, we believe, one of the major reasons why almost every child with autism is very low in sulfate is sulfate is needed to detoxify many substances, including especially toxins from the gut. So we think that the reason many children, almost all children with autism, have a low sulfate in their body is because they're using all of it to detoxify all the toxins from their gut bacteria. You also need sulfate to lubricate your GI tract to help pass stool. You also need it in order to detoxify or to metabolize neurotransmitters from your brain. So it's very important. Also, cytochrome 450 enzymes in the body can convert P-cresol into quinone methydes, which are again a very highly reactive oxygen species. In the kidneys, P-cresol is very toxic to the kidneys. It's a well-known nephrotoxin. It does this because, again, it creates oxidative stress and inflammation, and that greatly impacts kidney efficiency. 1 in 7 adults in the US has chronic kidney disease, and the rate seems to be even higher in adults with autism, and this seems to be one of the reasons. P-cresol also affects the immune system in a variety of ways. Macrophages are an important part of the immune system, and the macrophages are less able to kill off invading bacteria or viruses because of the presence of P-cresol. Also, with autism, what's very important is 3 studies have shown that when you administer P-cresol to mice, it causes autism symptoms in those animals. And so this is a schematic getting across this idea. When the mice receive P-cresol and given to them, they develop autistic behaviors. What's really exciting, if you do then a microbiota transplant from a healthy mouse, those mice can recover. They recover their social interaction and other behaviors. But if instead you take a typical mouse and take the gut bacteria from a mouse that's been treated with P-cresol, then fecal transplant from an unhealthy mouse with P-cresol then causes autism symptoms in the animals. So it's not just the P-cresol, but now the gut bacteria from those animals can cause these autistic symptoms. This is very powerful evidence. And if this fecal transplant works in animals, it's no surprise that we've seen good results in humans. So bottom line is that P-cresol is just one example, which we know a lot about, but there are many other toxins that are also elevated in children with autism. So we measured over 40 different metabolites in urine. We identified 32 that were significantly higher in children with autism versus typical kids. Many of these have never been measured before. We are still confirming the identity of all 32, but we now know that many of these are microbial modifications of either phenylalanine or tyrosine or tryptophan. So phenylalanine and tyrosine, as I mentioned, go on to make dopamine and go on to then also make noradrenaline and adrenaline. And then tryptophan is used by the body to make serotonin and also to make melatonin, which regulates sleep. So many of these toxins are known to be harmful, like P-cresol, because they have very similar chemical structures, and the rest of those are certainly highly suspect. But by altering neurotransmitter function, by altering the function of dopamine, serotonin, and the other neurotransmitters, that likely has a big effect on cognition, on attention, on mood, and by affecting melatonin, it affects sleep. So many, many symptoms of autism are due to the disruption of these neurotransmitters, we think. And so I'll give you one example of our measurements. This measurements of beta carboline in 50 children with autism and 47 typical kids. The red dots are the kids with autism. The blue dots, blue squares, are the typical kids. And you see 1x marks the median level. So some typical children have lower levels, some have higher levels, up to 10 times the median. But above that 10 times marker, you only see kids with autism. So about 30% of kids with autism have levels of this yeast metabolite that are 10 to 1,000 times higher the average in typical children. So this is a very good biomarker for diagnosing someone with autism, but also telling you that they have a substantial yeast infection. But there are also there are many other metabolites in it mentioned. So we measured these 32 metabolites that are highly suspect, many of which are microbial metabolites from yeast or bacteria. And what we see is that on average, children with autism have seven that are extremely elevated compared to the typical kids who had zero, because we define the reference range as that of every typical child. So all the typical child have zero, and the kids with autism on average have seven. Some have as few as one, up to 24. But there were three kids, who I'll come to in a moment, who didn't have any. And those are three special autism cases. But again, this test shows that we're roughly 97% accurate in diagnosing a child with autism versus a typical child, just from knowing what to measure in their urine sample. And so it's also important to see that on the bottom axis, we're plotting age, and there's not much trend versus age, that these high levels of these metabolites occur in early age, as young as age 2, and continue at similar levels up until age 11. And we've begun measuring the levels in some of our adults, and we've seen some of these also elevated in adults. So we've learned from our medical history studies of children and adults with autism, the GI symptoms almost always start in infancy and can continue for many years or even decades if untreated. And so we believe that these levels of these metabolites probably are continuing as well. But there were three children with autism who did not have these elevated metabolites. And my PhD student did some extra research, and she found that, in fact, these three children had very unusual other major errors of metabolism that are likely inborn, likely genetic. So there are few children with autism we believe have their autism symptoms from a severe single gene disorder. The rest, almost all the rest, have strong evidence of a microbial infection. I won't say it's the only cause, but it's certainly a major contributing factor. So we are going to be very bold and propose a new autism phenotype defined by a lab measurement. Unusually high levels of any of those microbial metabolites derived from tryptophan or phenylalanine or tyrosine, which we know are then going to be psychoactive and be able to affect neurotransmitter function and brain function. On average, we found 7 metabolites in each child. Some of these primarily affect neurological symptoms. Some likely affect both the gut and the brain, like P-cresol. There's high variability in which metabolites are elevated. Some children have high P-cresol, others have high indoxyl sulfate, some have both. But basically, this represents 90% of what we'll call non-syndromic kids with autism. In other words, those who don't have obvious genetic disorders like Fragile X, etc. But for example, even kids with Pitt-Hopkins, a severe genetic disorder, also often have a bad gut bacteria, which can worsen their symptoms. What's exciting is very similar to the mouse study I mentioned. We did fecal transplant in children with autism, and we found that that level of P-cresol sulfate in their stool could be decreased 90% down to normal levels. So just additional evidence that we're very much on the right track, because after that decrease, GI symptoms and autism symptoms improved as well. So just to conclude, 40% of kids with autism have obvious gut problems, but many more, we'll say most, have hidden gut problems. They have yeast or bacterial infections that don't affect the gut, but affect the brain. 90% of kids with autism on average have 7 of these extremely elevated metabolites, many of which are microbial, and the rest we're still investigating. These bacterial or yeast metabolites affect the gut, the brain, the kidneys, the immune system, the mitochondria, and limit your ability to detoxify other substances. They affect dopamine and serotonin, which affects your cognition, attention, and mood, and they affect melatonin, causing sleep problems. Some of these microbial metabolites, like P-cresol, cause autistic symptoms in mice and correlate with autism symptoms in humans. Our new test is about 90% accurate in differentiating kids with autism versus typical kids. So that's why we're defining a new phenotype. But I want to make this really simple. A very simple way of thinking of it is that these metabolites from yeast and bacteria, alcohol is an example of a yeast metabolite. And yeast, well, the alcohol obviously can have a great effect on brain function, on emotion, on memory, and many things, but doesn't have too much effect on gut symptoms. So a simple way to think of it is that children with autism are essentially drunk on these microbial metabolites. The exciting news is if they stop being exposed to them, we have hopes that there can be significant improvement. So our microbiota transplant therapy that I'll come back to a little bit, it can decrease the levels of P-cresol sulfate to normal, and MTT likely decreases many other microbial metabolites. We're measuring those now in the lab, and we're waiting for the results. But we do know that in one of our studies, for Pitt Hopkins, we found that we could greatly increase the amount of butyrate and greatly increase the amount of bacteria that produce butyrate. So we found that already in one small study. We're anxious to see the results for our other studies. So I want to move on to the second part of the talk, which is how do we test for these hidden gut infections? And so again, a caveat is I am the president of a company that's patented this test, licensed it, the test from ASU that we developed and shared it with a commercial company, Analudos. It's a company in the UK that's now offering it. So testing for gut infections in autism is complex because we can't easily see inside the gut. There are thousands of different bacteria and yeast in the gut. Many are beneficial, some are harmful, but it can depend on what environment they're in. So it's very unclear which species or strains are producing these toxic metabolites. And so the best option, we think, is to test for the presence of the toxic metabolites in the urine. Because if they're in the urine, that means they left the gut and were able to enter the body. So we've created a company, which is a spin-off company from ASU that I lead. When we created it, ASU rated it gave us the first place award that year as the top startup company. And ASU, by the way, is the largest university in the country, so that's a great honor. And since then, we've been collaborating with Analudos for 3 years to get this test commercialized. And a month ago, we began offering the beta version. So I'm really excited that we now have that test. Many families have ordered that now. And again, most of the families are finding, yes, they do have high levels of these yeast or bacterial metabolites or both. So we call it currently a combined gut health test from Analudos and Autism Diagnostics. It's very simple. You just collect a urine sample, freeze it, and ship it to the UK. It thaws during shipping, but that's fine because we have a preservative in it. Any family can order it, special rules from the UK. So you don't need a physician to prescribe the test. You can just go to Analudos website and order it. The test includes a measure of 3 toxic yeast metabolites. It also includes measurements of many bacterial metabolites, both those that are dopamine related and those that are serotonin and melatonin related. It also measures 3 of the important precursors to serotonin and dopamine, tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. Also, what they've been doing for many years is they're really the leaders in measuring gluten and casein peptides. So gluten and casein are small molecules which your body should digest into even smaller amino acids. But if they're showing up in your urine, that's telling your body isn't digesting them, and it's telling you have a leaky gut, and they're getting from your gut into your body, and probably having a significant effect on function because they can bind to opioid receptors in the brain. And so this is a good way to know if you need the diet or if you're on the diet, are you really are you really avoiding all gluten and milk products? So it's a nice bonus to the test as well. So interpretation of the test, we plan on using it as a diagnostic aid in future. Currently, the current version doesn't have all the metabolites from our research study, but we're adding more of them. Right now, it's about 86% accurate in differentiating a child with autism from a typically developing child. About 72% of kids with autism test positive. We've added on a few more metabolites, so the number is now a little higher. This test will then tell you, do you have those high levels of yeast metabolites or bacterial metabolites, and how high are they? And that can help you guide what treatment. Do you need probiotics? Do you need antifungals, etc.? It'll also tell you about abnormal neurotransmitter levels and tell you if your body's digesting gluten or casein if you're not on the diet. The advantages of this test is we're using state-of-the-art equipment, LCMS methods. We have an excellent pediatric reference range, and that's really important because many labs don't have a pediatric reference range. They assume children have the same levels as adults, and that's often not the case. And in particular, we use very healthy children who don't have any health problems to establish that reference range. The lab is led by 3 autism dads, each with 20 plus years of autism research experience. They're very dedicated, as I am. So bottom line is they have great equipment, great reference ranges, and great staff, and they're very proudly dedicated to improving the lives of children and adults with autism. You can order the test from this website, and again, I'll send a copy of this so you can have the link to order it, but just analudos.com is the website. In the near future, we will be confirming the identity of more of those 32 metabolites I mentioned and adding them to the test. And that will increase the sensitivity of the test, detect more potential bacterial and yeast infections. We are also now, in about 2 weeks, we hope to be applying for FDA approval of this test as a diagnostic aid. We hope then it will be available within 6 months and perhaps sooner. Just imagine, our hope is that if this test is used as a diagnostic aid for children as young as 2 years old, that could help many families who don't get a diagnosis until much later for earlier treatment. But also, I still hear even from adults who think they might have an autism diagnosis. So here's a way to check. Do you think you have microbial infection that's associated with autism? And not only does it help confirm diagnosis, but also it can help guide treatment. So moving on to the last part of this talk, I want to talk about obvious and hidden gut problems in autism and how to treat them. Why is it that 90% of kids with autism have these high levels of toxic bacteria, toxic metabolites from gut bacteria and yeast? Well, these infections can be due to a combination of things. Antibiotic use, especially during infancy or pregnancy, herbicides or pesticides in the home. We're very concerned about glyphosates, for example, but also pesticides on your food. So we think it's important to go organic. Poor infant gut bacteria that they start with. A low fiber diet. Most Americans don't get nearly enough whole vegetables, whole fruit, beans, and whole grains. So important for a healthy gut. Many kids with autism choose to be very picky eaters. They eat only a very narrow range of foods. That increases the risk of an unhealthy microbiome because then you need a wide variety of foods to help support a wide variety of gut bacteria. Generally speaking, the more diverse your gut bacteria, the healthier your gut. And also, 3 major studies have shown that many kids with autism have low levels of digestive enzymes for digesting simple sugars and carbohydrates, especially low in lactase. And so that can also help feed harmful bacteria. So these harmful gut microbes can then produce toxins that can leak out of the gut. It can actually damage the gut to increase their leakage and harm the gut, the body, and the brain. They interfere with dopamine, serotonin, melatonin receptors, and hence they can worsen cognition, attention, mood, and sleep, so causing anxiety, depression, and ADHD symptoms. So the standard treatments for gut problems are trying to improve the diet, using digestive enzymes, especially lactase if there's a problem with dairy products, fiber supplements, probiotics, laxatives, enemas, suppositories, antidiarrheals, antacids, and exercise is very important because exercise helps move your body. At the extreme end, if you're in a hospital bed and lying still, then that's very constipating. But unfortunately, these treatments are often very limited and temporary benefit because these treatments are not addressing the root cause, which is getting rid of the bacterial or yeast infection. They can help, but in our experience, in many cases, adults still having these problems 20, 30, 40 years later, those are big issues. So the advanced treatments that we recommend is the vitamin mineral supplement that we've producing for over 10 years now from our nonprofit, ANRC. It helps in a wide variety of areas. One of the special features is that it has high amounts of sulfate, and we conducted the only study to show that we could greatly increase sulfate levels halfway towards normal from our supplement. And that the sulfate, again, is very important to help the body get rid of the toxins from bacteria and gut, from bacteria and yeast. There are specialized diets like gluten-free, casein-free, and many others, and I've given a talk about a dozen different diets. Customized probiotics. We did the largest study of probiotics using a customized probiotic, tailoring it for each child, and there was some benefit there. And then antifungals. We'd like to see a lot more research on this. There's very little research on antifungals, but they seem to be very helpful for the roughly half of families with autism have a yeast infection. The problem is the only symptom of a yeast infection is usually just worse autism symptoms. And that's why a test is so important to know if antifungals are needed. But really, the main treatment that we think is most effective by far is microbiota transplant therapy to just get rid of those harmful bacteria and replace them with beneficial bacteria from the healthiest people. So I'll briefly explain that. What is microbiota transplant therapy? It's an investigational treatment that we've used to transplant gut bacteria from healthy donors. We've completed 4 successful clinical trials for autism and a related condition called Pitt-Hopkins. We now have 2 more clinical trials underway. We've observed up to an 80% reduction in GI symptoms. We've seen severe autism decrease to mild autism in children or mild to moderate autism in adults, with benefits continuing in most cases, not all, but most cases at 2 years. In order to continue this research, to get us to FDA approval, we had to form a company, Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, to fund these clinical trials because the final stage of clinical trials is very expensive. And so this is a very unique company. I'm blessed that it's now over 80 autism families have invested each on average about $100,000. So we've raised $8 million now to fund our current clinical trials. But now we need to reach out and hope a couple hundred more families choose to invest so we can conduct the final phase 3 studies that we need to get FDA approval to get this treatment available to everyone. So our treatment involves 2 weeks of an antibiotic, a special one called vancomycin to kill off harmful bacteria, and then a bowel cleanse, just like you'd have for a colonoscopy to remove remaining bacteria, and then 8 to 16 weeks of capsules, like I show here. These are some of our actual capsules, or a powder that you can mix with milk or yogurt. It contains roughly 400 species, those present in very healthy adults, the top few percent healthiest Americans. Unlike typical probiotics that only contain 1 to 10 species, and they're mostly the wrong species. They're generally just aerobic species, whereas most of the bacteria in your gut, about 90%, are anaerobic, meaning they're killed by oxygen. And the great thing about this treatment is that after we stop treatment, the benefits are usually continuing at our end evaluation, typically 18 months to 2 years after treatment is stopped. So long-lasting effect for both gut symptoms and autism symptoms. Our phase 1 trial, 80% reduction in GI symptoms, severe symptoms in autism, initially reduced to moderate, and then slowly, gradually, over the next 2 years, families just said their child was better able to learn. And they symptoms were reduced to mild on average. And it was very safe. We've had over 100 children and adults with autism treated with 0 serious adverse effects. And no one has dropped out of our study due to adverse effects. In our phase 2 study, the federal government gave us $1 million to do a phase 2 study for adults with autism who'd had these GI symptoms and autism symptoms 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And what we found is good improvement. The treatment group in green improved more than the orange group, the placebo group. And you can see on every one of 20 symptoms we looked at, the green bars are higher than the orange bars. The most improvement is in the symptoms on the left, tantrums, GI, aggression, hyperactivity, mood, self-injury, sleep. Most of those are due to neurotransmitters, improving those, as well as improving the GI symptoms. So it's not a cure, but it's certainly a major improvement in symptoms. For example, one parent said, I believe the treatment was foundational for my son. Seems happier, more well-adjusted, less anxious, less OCD, more receptive to typical social interactions. His troublesome outbursts are now much less frequent and less intense. He's sleeping much better. His daily bowels are regular and normal. So in order to get to FDA approval, this is our pathway. So we started with capsules for Pitt Hopkins, and that study was very successful. We now are doing a second study with a powder form you can mix with milk or yogurt because most people with Pitt Hopkins can't swallow capsules. That study is well underway, and we expect the study to finish in 1 year. And so in a year from today, we'll apply to the FDA for drug approval for Pitt Hopkins. So it'll be exciting to get it on the market. And then we also have completed 3 studies for children and adults with autism. We're now doing a 4th study because, believe it or not, we think we've been underdosing. So we're now investigating a higher dose. Can we see even more benefit than we've seen in the past? And then after that study, then we hope to do a phase 3 study, start those at the end of this year, but we have to raise of order $10 to $20 million. So that's why we're hoping a lot more families would choose to invest in our company. And then when that study finishes, then we'll apply to the FDA for approval for autism. So hopefully then it will be covered by Medicaid and also covered hopefully by insurance companies. We'd like the treatment to be as free or nearly free as possible for families. So our company is a unique company. We're funded by autism families to help autism families. We've already raised $7 million. It's now nearly $8 million from 80 plus families. It's sufficient for our current studies, but we now need to raise of order $20 million for our final phase 3 study. Pharma is unbelievably profitable, so there's the potential for very high profits for families who choose to invest with us. If you want to help make a difference in your child's life, the lives of millions of others, you can learn more about future webinars. I apologize, I have the wrong dates there, but I'll send an email with the dates. Our next meetings are next week and the following week. But unfortunately, federal rules do limit people who are allowed to invest. Only people who have high incomes, $200,000 a year or $300,000 a year with a spouse, or people who have assets of $1 million, including retirement funds. In fact, there are big advantages to investing with IRAs or Roth IRAs, so I could explain more. But with that, I'll just close with a summary. We are really excited that we have identified now that roughly 90% of children with autism have extremely elevated levels of toxic metabolites from gut bacteria or yeast. that we now know it's just absolutely clear they disrupt important neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, and more. They can cause autism symptoms in animals that are recovered by microbiota transplant for those animals. We developed a test which has now been commercially available for a month. It's our beta version, but it's still very good. It can detect most bacterial and yeast infections that are common in autism, and families can order it directly from our website. And soon we hope to have an FDA approved version that will actually be an official diagnostic test. And then in terms of treatment, our treatment is very promising because it's very safe. We're replacing harmful gut bacteria with beneficial bacteria from the very healthiest donor. So it's a very natural treatment that slowly, gradually, safely improves the microbiome. It improves GI symptoms, it improves autism symptoms. The benefits are long lasting. Um, and we just need to do one more final phase 3 study, but we need to raise 20 million to do it. So you can get more information about our research from these three websites, from Interludos if you want to learn more about the testing, from ASU website if you want to learn more about our general research, and from Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics. We have a lot of videos there, many videos I've recorded that have go into more depth on these different topics. But I want to acknowledge the many autism families and Pitt-Hopkins families who have been both our study participants and also over 1,000 families have donated to our research at ASU. And so couldn't have done it without them. But as well as many other groups I list here, that many other foundations have also supported us. Our company now is so grateful to the over 80 families who have raised $8 million for us to help us with our studies. An incredible research team, a lot of researchers. Here I'm just listing the main ones. And then also very grateful to the University of Minnesota for making these microbiota products for us, and Finch for making it for some of our earlier studies. And the staff at Interludos, it's been great to work with them for 3 years. So with that, again, you can email me at james@gutbrainaccesstherapeutics.com if you have more questions about the company, or you can go to the website. But now what I want to do is open it up for questions because we have a lot of people here. I'm going to ask people to just do it through chat. So give me just a moment as I turn chat back on. So give me just a moment here. So please, if you can go ahead and type in any questions that you have in chat, and we'll take them from there. And I'd like to also introduce, if you can see on your screen, Christina Flynn, the PhD student I mentioned, who's been quite a blessing to me and been working with her for a couple of years now. I'm so excited to get out that paper on P-cresol. But let me go ahead and open up a chat so I can see questions. So there was a question, will the presentation be shared? Yes, I will send a copy of this recording after we edit out some of the dead space at the beginning. I'll send a copy of this to everyone who's registered for the site. Another question, given the high presence of yeast in producing toxic metabolites, have you considered adding antifungals? That's a great question. And the answer is we are thinking about it very hard. We know that we see great improvement here from the microbiota transplant, which includes some beneficial yeast. In our last study that we did of yeast, we found that kids with autism who had high yeast had worse autism symptoms. And we also found an anti-correlation with certain beneficial yeast. And so that was very interesting to see that some of the harmful ones anti-correlated with some of the commensal or potentially beneficial ones. So we're waiting for the results of more yeast studies, more results from the lab to see if we need to add antifungals. Right now, the answer is we aren't sure. But it's possible, and then in that case, we might see even more benefit. Let's see. When will we begin a phase 3 autism study? We could begin a phase 3 autism study probably as soon as December of this year. That would be a much larger study. Ideally, I'd like to have about 150 children and 150 adults in that study. We've identified some of the study centers like Harvard Medical School. I was just talking with their chair of pediatric gastroenterology today. Um, and so what we need, really the only thing slowing us down is money. We need money to do these studies, to do the final phase 3 study. Did any of the participants have G tubes? One of our current Pitt Hopkins patients does have a G tube. Yes, the powder could be given through some types of G tubes, depending on where it's located. We want to give it ideally the upper part of the gut, so it goes down through the small intestine, because unlike with C. diff infections, where you can give microbiota through the colon, through an enema, kids with autism seem to have inflammation throughout most of their 28 feet of GI tract. So that's why we want to give that's why we give the microbiota orally. We found better success there than when in our first study, some kids received it by enema, and we did not see quite as much long-term benefit there. Next question. Would you say it's worth waiting to order the urine test until the rest of the toxins are included? It's your choice. I'll say that right now we can detect with the ones we've just added, probably high 70% of kids with autism we can identify out of potentially probably 90%. So I think it's useful doing now. But if you want to wait 6 months, we'll have a little bit better accuracy as we continue to improve it. So it depends on how anxious you are for a result. Uh, I, I'll let you decide. I won't give an opinion. Is there a protocol to follow while waiting for MTT to be approved? So we have an extensive protocol on our nonprofit website, autismnrc.org. And so this protocol begins with our nutritional supplement, and then fish oil, and then carnitine for some kids, and very importantly, a healthy diet that's also allergen-free. Beyond there, we have an ANRC consultant, I forgot to mention. So when you get the test results from Analudos, if you order it, the lab isn't allowed to give you direct information, but we have a consultant from our nonprofit who, I think it's $40 or so, and schedule an appointment with them, and they can help you interpret the test results and also help you with suggestions on other things to consider investigating. Did you include adults additionally diagnosed with IDD and epilepsy? That's a very interesting question. So yes, many of our adults did have intellectual disability. In our first studies, we excluded children with autism who had epilepsy. We did have one child with Tourette's in our study, and that child with Tourette's, after about 8 weeks or so, was cured of Tourette's. And I don't use the word cure lightly. So their Tourette's was cured, and there are other studies showing that Tourette's can be cured from fecal transplant. And we know that P-cresol and other metabolites can cause seizures in animals because, again, they're affecting neurotransmitter levels. And there's one small study showing people with epilepsy have higher levels of these metabolites. So most children with autism in our studies, in the study data I shared with you, very few of them had seizures. So we suspect we'll see even higher levels in children with autism and seizures, but we don't know for sure. I missed the first part of the presentation. Yes, I'm going to be sharing the video recording. We are recording this. How do the bad metabolites cause children to lose all their speech and regress? Well, lots of different ways. I mean, partly it's just, initially we thought it was mostly just the pain associated with constipation or diarrhea and the anxiety. You know, if you've had diarrhea for a week, you're wondering, when are you next going to be having loose bowels? And so that's a problem. And the pain associated with it is certainly part of it. But now we know it's much more. So bottom line is that we know these metabolites inhibit growth of the neurons in the brain. We know So that's what you need to make connections, to learn. And we know that they can affect many of these symptoms. So I suspect in cases of sudden regression, I suspect that those are cases of bacterial or yeast sudden infections. In cases of early onset of autism, we suspect they just had those infections starting early in life. But we need more research to really know. Um, let's see. How sensitive is the urine sample for annulidose for it to be able to be the first urine clean catch? Well, we prefer first morning urine just because it's most concentrated, but it doesn't have to be. In the data I shared with you, maybe 20% of the kids, it was just a spot collection. It's just not quite as concentrated. Your numbers won't be quite as accurate. Does it need to be a clean catch? We prefer a clean catch, meaning wipe the genital area first with an alcohol swab and then begin peeing and then catch the pee midstream. But really, that doesn't seem to be very important. Just getting pee in a cup. Some kids are not potty trained, and so there are strap-on bags that are available that you can use. It is, I know, trickier for the younger kids, but try to do a clean catch. If you're trying to catch it out of a diaper, you have to avoid fecal contamination because that could alter the results and give you false results. You just need to make sure there's no fecal contamination. Will the new test work if the child's on probiotics, antibiotics, or yeasts? The test will work in the sense that it will tell you, are those toxins present? But you might get a misinterpretation. So if a child's on antibiotics, they can temporarily stop the production. They will stop the production of many of those bacterial metabolites. But when you stop the antibiotic, then they'll probably come back. So we don't recommend doing the test if you're on antibiotics or on antifungals, but waiting until you've been off them for a little bit, because then if you're on it temporarily, because then you'll know if they've returned. But if you've been on them long term, and sadly I know of a few kids who have been on vancomycin for years, then it's probably worth testing because, again, every antibiotic, every antifungal is not effective against every condition. And the same with probiotics. So the test will tell you is really a good way to guide your treatment. I would, in an ideal world, if you're not doing those, do the test, see what your baseline levels are, and then try a treatment. And you can try an antibiotic, try changing your diet and see are the levels decreasing. And that will be very helpful to you. Someone else says, we ordered the test. They need the samples to be frozen, but takes a few days to arrive in the UK. We just recommend freezing the sample when you have it. It gives a little bit of extra stability. But again, the samples are stable because of a special preservative they've added. And so they're stable for a good week or more. But it is expensive to ship to the UK. You need to do second or third day shipping. And so it may cost of order $50 to $100 to ship. We're working to decrease that, but that is the one limitation. And someone asked earlier, I think, about the cost of the test. It's about 200 British pounds, which is about 260 US dollars. My daughter, age 11, had 11,000 level of P-cresol. Okay, so 2,000 is, okay, an average child has a level of about 800, a typical healthy child. The cutoff for the 90th percentile is approximately 2,000. So your child is about 5 times the 90th percentile of a typical healthy child. So roughly 10,000 is our cutoff for this is a sure sign your child has autism. So that's what it's telling us. And some kids have much higher levels. How do you get the customized probiotics? So I'll put that in here. We worked with a company called Sun Genomics. And so realize this is very early stage research. But Sun Genomics, we did a study with them. What they do is they take a stool sample, measure levels of all your gut bacteria using very advanced testing, and then try to pick the best commercially available probiotics for a person. So they'll mix it up individually for each person. They also have a general version if you don't want to spend the money on the testing, which seems to be helpful. And so there's some benefit. But again, regular probiotics are generally types that grow in yogurt or milk. They are not what normally grows in your gut because your gut is mostly anaerobic. Most probiotics are aerobic. So it's like you have a garden and you're trying to grow corn and wheat and barley. You only have seeds for cucumbers. You can't grow corn and wheat and barley from seeds from cucumbers. You might alter the composition of the soil. You might alter the pH of the gut, but you can't grow bacteria without the right seeds. Does a child need to be off anti-anxiety sleep meds? No, no reason to be off sleep meds. Oh, sorry, I think I missed a few questions. Let me go back. I find this yeast aspect of things interesting. I'm 66, my child is 27, never had a yeast infection through my whole life, except during my pregnancy. Okay, this is a yeast infection in the gut, whereas women tend to have yeast infections, vaginal yeast infections. That's different. They can be contamination because the openings are very close, but we're talking about yeast infections in the gut as being the ones we're focused on. But I will point out that I'll just give an example of my father when he was an older man in a nursing home and he had some dementia. He would have days when suddenly he would become much worse. And almost always, we identified it was due to a UTI, a urinary tract infection. And so as soon as his behavior suddenly worsened, we'd have him checked. We then give him an antibacterial or antifungal, and he'd improve substantially right away. So there's no doubt that in adults who are vulnerable, a urinary tract infection can be a major problem. But also now we know these infections in the gut can also cause these major problems. So diflucan is certainly one of the two main antifungals that's used. It's a systemic one. So yes, I think that antifungals are very helpful. And it's if you have an infection during pregnancy, like an infection such as rubella, is known to greatly increase the risk of autism during infection. We suspect that a gut infection during pregnancy could also cause yeast infection, could also cause or can increase the risk of autism symptoms. Please add me to your distribution list. I'm sorry I don't add people individually, but if you please go to my autism website, autism.asu.edu, then you'll be, actually, if you've registered here, we will be adding everyone here to our email distribution. So you don't have to worry about being added. But you can also sign off. You can always sign off of it anytime you want. What's the normal range of P-cresol? I think I already covered that. If it's over 2,000, I'm concerned. The more over 2,000, the more worried I am. The higher it is, the worse it's affecting symptoms. Does child need to be covered that? Would the 32 pathogens be listed in research papers? Yes, when we publish them. But I already listed 8 or so in the presentation. Will a carnivore diet help downsize the dysbiotic microbiome? Well, a carnivore diet is going to be higher in protein, and these metabolites come from protein. Protein is broken down to tryptophan, phenylalanine, tyrosine. So it's conceivable it could worsen it, but there's still so much to learn. The safe answer is we don't really know. And that's why we need to do diet studies, but now with a test so we can see which diets might be more or less helpful. Some diets are probably going to worsen symptoms and some will hopefully improve. Antifungals was only one patient. Well, actually, there's more than one study. There was a case study, but also Bill Shaw did a study with, I'm trying to remember how many patients, but it was back in 2000. I have applied 4 times to the federal government to do a study of yeast in children with autism, and 4 times they said, no, not a problem. You know how to treat fungal infections. So they just won't fund it. It's just so frustrating. So that's why we want to raise the money to do it ourselves. Um, Restoring the microbiota will hopefully heal the gut and improve GI disorders, but can also improve the immune system. Yes, is the exciting answer. So we have one of the children in our study had severe food allergies. They went into anaphylactic shock when they were exposed to nuts. After our treatment, they were cured of that severe food allergy. So again, and this is not surprising that we know there's a very strong connection between the gut and the brain. There are now clinical trials going on at Harvard for treating peanut allergies with microbiota transplant. So, yes, the immune system is very closely connected to the gut. FMT should be from a family member, or could it be from any donor out of the family? We don't think it should be from a family member, not at all. We found that family members tend to have very similar microbiomes. So, whereas for C. diff infections, let me back up. C. diff is a horrible infection that causes life-threatening diarrhea, primarily in elderly Americans and people in hospitals. Causes explosive diarrhea, which makes it very contagious. It used to affect about 500,000 Americans a year, used to kill about 29,000 Americans, almost as many as are injured or died in car accidents. And so you can treat it with antibiotics, but it often keeps returning until you're weaker and weaker and you die. Microbiota transplant is miraculous for C. diff infection. 1 to 2 doses will cure you, usually in 2 to 3 days. You go from dying to being symptom-free in 2 to 3 days. It is a miracle for it, and that's why it was approved by the FDA for C. diff. But with autism, it is much, much harder to treat. We now know that the vancomycin pretreatment is very important. The bowel cleanse we suspect is important, and you have to do long-term treatment. Our studies are for 12 to 16 weeks. Whereas with C. diff, almost anyone can be a donor. For autism, it really matters who the donor is. Even the top few percent healthiest Americans is not good enough. We've seen variation there. So we've identified who seem to be the healthiest donors. That's who we use in our studies. So there have been a lot of reports of people anecdotally doing it. And again, I'll just say it really matters who the donor is. And again, it is not approved by the FDA. We do not recommend doing it on your own. Rarely, very rarely, there have been a few people who have died from fecal transplant from the wrong donor. People who weren't tested properly, and they were also very sick and on very suppressed immune system. On the other hand, for people with C. diff who went through formal testing, over 50,000 people have been treated very safely. So it's just important. American Gastroenterological Association has very rigorous standards which we follow and go beyond them. Okay, I have one son with level 3 autism and the other two who are neurodivergent and possibly autistic. If they test positive for autism, would they be treated? My guess is they might not test positive for autism, but they still might have high levels. In other words, there's a difference between the level that we would say is abnormal. Let me see if my camera will catch this, and the higher level that indicates definitely autism. So it's an in-between level where there's some effect, but not so severe it's autism. So we want to do more studies on other conditions like ADHD and others, but we know that these gut bacteria like P-cresol are involved in chronic kidney disease. We know they're involved in Parkinson's, possibly involved in epilepsy, possibly involved in Alzheimer's, very likely involved in other conditions like anxiety and depression. So this test is really a gut health test, and we're applying to the FDA to use it specifically for diagnosing for autism when it occurs early in life. But if you get these bacterial infections later in life, that's when you would be developing symptoms like chronic kidney disease or Parkinson's, depending on the type of infection. We think. Again, I want to make caveats. There's still a lot to learn. Um, Thank you, Dr. Adams. My son Ray was in one of the MTT studies. Oh, that's very nice to hear. Thank you, Nadia. Um, let's see. Did you mention certain antibiotics taken during pregnancy can increase the chance of the fetus becoming autistic? Yes, I very much believe that antibiotics during pregnancy are likely to increase the risk, but especially if a mother has a C-section, because the C-section is a substantial surgery, and then the mother receives antibiotics, and we know that the antibiotics absolutely pass from the mother through the breast milk into the infant. In fact, in animal studies, the main way to dose an infant animal is to dose the mother with antibiotics because then it goes through the mother's breast milk into the infant. So C-sections we found in our study are certainly a substantial risk factor, um, as are many other things. Low fiber diet, short period of breastfeeding is very important because breast milk is so wonderful for establishing a healthy gut. Let's see, other questions. Low or borderline iron during the first months of pregnancy, yes, is certainly a major factor. We think that about doubles the risk. And fortunately, about 10% of women start out their pregnancy anemic, but it becomes about 25% by mid-pregnancy. So much iron is needed to produce blood for the placenta and for the infant. And that's why and iron is so important because it carries oxygen to the body and the brain. So one of the major reasons women are tired during the pregnancy is just low iron. But if you're not getting enough for your body, you're also not getting enough for your infant body or brain. Um, and low folic acid, yeah. So folic acid, I'm very concerned about. Low levels of folate, the natural form of the vitamin, are a problem. And but also there's a new study showing that high levels of folic acid are also a problem. And in fact, I hypothesized that during the 1990s, when we began adding folic acid, the artificial form, to food, that increased the rate of autism, I think, because um, we know that high levels of unmetabolized folic acid in the blood are associated with an increased risk for autism. So folic acid is the artificial form. Some mice are great at converting it to the active form. Humans are lousy at converting it to the active form, and some humans are really bad at converting it to the active form. So that's why we recommend folate. Jill James's work over 20 years ago showed that folic acid was not necessarily very helpful for kids with autism, but folate, the active form, so folinic acid or vitamin or MTHF, are the good form. That's what we use in our vitamin mineral supplement. My collaborator, Dr. Richard Fry, has done many studies of high dose folinic acid. So we recommend those and recommend not giving excessive folic acid. How to apply for the next study? You're on my email list if you've registered. So when we have our next study announced, we'll announce it by email and then people can apply. But we cannot take applications until we have funding and approval from the FDA. Email me tomorrow. Yes, anyone on the call, feel free to email me with personal questions. I'll try to answer those. I'm not a physician, so I cannot give medical advice. But instead, what I've done is I've trained our ENRC consultant. We now have a low-cost consultant who can give basic personalized information and help you with what you're doing. We actually, if you do that, if you meet with our consultant, you can join our consultant research study where we follow families long term just to rate the effectiveness of any treatments that they try. And that will help us learn better how to improve on the recommendations that consultants make. But they can look at your personal situation and give personalized education. but I'm not a physician. I'm not allowed to give personal advice. Is there a difference between MTT pill taken by mouth and that done by colonoscopy? Yes. The reason that we in our first study we administered it, um, some children received the first dose by rectal enema, and some received it orally. And those who got it orally did better. Again, the reason is that although most of your gut bacteria is in the colon, quite a bit still is in your small intestine. And giving it by rectal enema, it just won't reach your small intestine. So that's why we give it orally, because that's how you naturally get exposed to bacteria, is from the food you eat, the water you drink. If you were a dog, a healthy dog goes around eating other dogs' poop because that gives them more microbiota. I'm not suggesting that, but humans, now that we have toilets, we're much less exposed to one another's bacteria. And that's good when there's an infection like dysentery, but it means we have less diverse microbiota because of that. How can one sibling have severe gut problems and another not have it? Well, it could be genetics. It could be one child had an early infection and one didn't. If you send in a sample for the child who doesn't have it, I'd be happy to offer a free test for the child who doesn't have it, and it'd be interesting to compare. And we'll see. I will say, um, well, I better stop it there. What about C-section without breast milk? Well, that would be the worst case, is to do a C-section without breast milk, because breast milk, the fourth largest ingredient in breast milk, is a wonderful um, oligosaccharide, which has now begun to be added to many formulas, at least add some of it. And it's puzzled scientists for decades because the infant couldn't absorb it. It wasn't a nutrient for the infant. So why did the mother make it? It's a nutrient for certain key beneficial bacteria, like B. infantis, named after the infant. So an infant is breastfed, most of the bacteria is B. infantis and its cousins. And so that helps establish a healthy microbiota and then and outcompete the bad guys. And then once you begin slowly adding in solids, then you naturally transition to a healthier microbiome. So in general, breast milk is great. But as I think about it, if mother was on C-section, then maybe getting breast milk from another mother for the first until the antibiotic course is done, and a couple of days after that for the antibiotics to clear the body. That'd probably be a better way to go. Again, I'm hypothesizing here, so bear with me. Thank you, doctor. Thank you all for listening. Do you have results of the therapy effects on kids with mild to moderate autism? Most of the kids in our study had moderate to severe autism, because if you have gut problems, you tend to have worse autism. But the kids with mild to moderate autism, those are the ones who fell below the cutoff for autism. So they improved as well. In most cases, again, I'm talking about averages. Is glucophorine best? So I believe that folinic acid or methyl tetrahydrofolate are much better than folic acid. The research studies bear this out. We've done the studies with folinic acid and MTHF. We show that they're great. The question that my colleague Dr. Fry is investigating is, what if we go to megadose amounts of folinic acid? And so he's doing the research studies on that now. And I'll say it certainly seems safe and helpful. Is it more helpful to give megadose? I don't know, and would love to have the time to do a research study on that. But it certainly seems very safe and worth trying. Are your supplements available at your website? All right, so let me just put in the website. It's autism.nrc.org. So that's our nonprofit website. I don't get any revenue from it. I work for free, even though I'm the president of it. And you can learn more about our nutritional supplements or vitamin mineral supplement, or learn more about our other recommendations and our ANRC consultant. Thank you much. Thank you for listening. SIBO is a big problem. Yes, SIBO is a big problem. I think this seems like a good way to address that. I do think ANRC Essentials have had a positive effect on my autistic son, has been on it 2 years. Thank you very much for that comment. Love to hear it. We've had families in our study treatment of it for 5 years. My daughter's been on it for a dozen years. Um, let's see. So grateful. So nice. Thank you for your kind words. I really appreciate it. I mean that very sincerely. As an autism dad, just so happy to hear when families benefit. Again, no one treatment helps every child, but we're trying hard to help every child. Did any of the participants express that they felt better? Oh, yeah, the most common report we have from families is their child or their adult just is happier, but also the pain is gone. Um, and so those are the two most common reports we have. Pain is gone, they feel much happier. Why do they feel happier? Well, partly because the pain is gone, but also, again, we're improving the neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin. Those are the happy neurotransmitters. So that's a big part of the reason. What about C-section, no antibiotics, and breastfed for 9 months? So C-section, not so great because then you don't get exposed to the vaginal and fecal gut bacteria. But no antibiotics is good. And breastfeeding, we think, is very good. Again, there's some concern about the first week when you're getting dosed with antibiotics, but I think continuing breastfeed helps. But again, once these infections set in, they seem very, very hard to displace through standard treatments. Nadia says, yes, my son did amazing. Well, just makes my day to hear that. I think that's it. So anyone else, feel free to email me any personal questions that you have. But again, I can't give advice on a personal situation. But if you have a question I haven't been able to answer, feel free to email me. But thank you all very much for listening. I hope this has been very informative. Please share this information with anyone you know, especially anyone who might be interested in being an investor in our company. And with that, I'll close, and I will send out in a day or two when we get the video edited, we'll send out a link to everyone who registered. So thank you all. Really appreciate having you here. And please cheer on my student, Christina Flynn, just been an incredible help to me.